there are a couple of ways to play jazz, and one is to learn one really good solo and play it over and over again. And so if you're going to do that, then you continually have to change the context. Because when you hear the same solo repeated in different situations to the untrained ear, which includes musicians, it doesn't sound like the same solo. So you see, you can notice that a musician will play with a quartet, and then it'll become an organ trio band, and then it's a band with guitar, and it's like you keep changing the context because the musicians are cognizant of the fact that they're playing the same crap over and over again. So what I decided to do is learn how, being a person who was in that camp and talking to the older musicians, you can view them as impediments to progress and envious, or you can understand that they know way more than you do, and they want to pass it on before they go to the great, jazz club in the sky. And I chose the latter. So I gradually learned how to actually improvise, as opposed to have a couple of licks that I repeat over and over again.
Having made the decision, though, I would assume you need some kind of stimulus to keep it fresh for yourself. And is it the people you put in the band with you?
Yeah, personnel is the key. Everybody in the band is actually improvising at the same time, and everybody in the band is actually listening. YouTube is great, but it wasn't around when I was a kid. But when you watch musicians who are actually improvising play live, they are making continual eye contact, particularly in the rhythm section. And they're using their ears, and the solos don't sound prepackaged. It's very few and far between. In the 30 years that I've been around, I've heard very few times when musicians were actually improvising. And that was kind of the goal, to get a bunch of musicians and pressure them and yell at them and force them to actually become improvisers, rather than to just stick to the idea of having great virtuosity and using that virtuosity. And I mean, it's a process, because most musicians I've been around don't know how to listen. That's why they spend so much time knowing, like they know everything, And it's in growing up in a city like New Orleans, where guys don't read, so everything they play, they sing it to you. And then I went to Boston and said, well, what is this song? And in New Orleans, when you talk about, how's that song go? They sing the melody to you. In Boston, they recite the chord changes, which was odd because I couldn't hear anything when they recited the chord changes. I was just like, okay. And then I had to wait for the song cycle to go around and say, oh, okay, and then I'd start playing. And they said, well, how do you do that? I said, I use my ears. Oh, wow, yeah. So it's just a different philosophy, and I'm a fan of that philosophy.
Okay.
Which is not the same as saying you shouldn't know anything, but everything should be in its proper context. And I think that we've kind of fallen into these two camps, where there are people who know and then there are people who hear. And if I had to choose between the two, I'll choose hearing over knowing, because by hearing you know anyway. You just can't tell other people what it is.
Now, whenever we talk on the phone, you're always immersed in listening to somebody or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious on who's got your attention now.
It really happened quite accidentally, but Wagner, the Meistersinger von Nuremberg. When I listen to opera now, when I listen to anything, I thought it was a drag at first. But digital technology, which doesn't sound better than analog technology, the great thing about it is that all of the information is in micro. So you tend just not to read it, because I'm 52, I can't read it any damn way. So you just put the music on and listen to it. And when I first started listening to Meistersinger, I didn't have any historical background about it at all. So I started saying, wow, this is kind of like the precursor to the Ring cycle. But then as I started listening, I went, wait a minute, this is way more involved than the Ring. This had to have come after the Ring. I still haven't actually verified it yet, but I'm allowing my ears to dictate the terms.
He did write at least one opera after the Ring, didn't he?
I don't know.
Three? Okay.
Is Meistersinger after Ring? at first when I heard it, because I heard a lot of themes, but then you start listening and the themes are so well hidden and so well constructed, I started going, wait a second. There's so much more information. Like the Ring, everybody talk, oh, the Ring cycle, the Ring. And it's incredible. But Meistersinger is so involved and so melodically and harmonically sophisticated that most people can't. I mean, I've just been astounded listening to it. I can't. It's been about a month, and I listen to it all day long.
It's like multi-layered.
It is completely multi-layered. There's so much. It's something that I always talk about Mahler's writing, because Mahler writes a primary melody and a secondary melody and a tertiary melody, and that's his harmony. And he's so good that if the primary melody got the flu, then you wouldn't miss it, because the secondary melody is so damn good, you just wouldn't miss it. And I always said about Wagner is that he writes in blocks, and his thing is about sound. But in this opera, there is so much melodic information going. It's so complicated, and the singing is so complicated. It's an astounding piece of work. That's what I'm listening to now.
Okay.
And I'm going back to the Warren Marsh record with Philly Joe Jones and
They won
and Paul
Atlantic.
Chambers.
Yeah.
It kind of affirms that bass solos should be used sparingly, because they're in every song, and it's like, wow, really, it's or what he did on the first song on the record. Paul plays first, and I say, okay, now that's the way, because what happens is that when the band is cooking, it starts with this emotion that happens, because Paul's walking these great lines, Philly's just swinging, and Warren's just playing all this incredible stuff that Wayne Shorter stole from him, and I don't blame him, because that's what I'm trying to do, is steal it. And I noticed it started kicking in last night. I was like, oh, here it comes. That's good, because I've been listening to it to steal it. But the song has this motion, and it's swinging and swinging and swinging, and then the bass solo comes and the motion goes, because it's not propelled anymore.
Yeah.
And Paul's playing all of this I sound like a saxophone player stuff, and the song just kind of falls off the cliff. And then you have to crank the whole thing up again, which is the ultimate problem with bass solos. But if you put them first, or in ballads, then it's great.
I remember when you came over to my house and you're looking at my records, you said, well, what do you got by Warren Marsh, And there's that album called The Art of the Improvisers.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, they recorded it in a club, and the guy it's like the old Benedetti, Charlie Parker.
Mm-hmm.
He turned off the tape machine when anybody else played, and he just kept the Warren Marsh solos. He said, oh, the guy's a genius, you should record it. But, to go back, let me use Warren Marsh as a jumping off point for another thing, and I know we've talked about this before as well. Young musicians and their relationship to the history of the music. And it came up again this week, somebody sent me a clip of Mulgrew Miller leading a class. Mulgrew passed away earlier this week. And you don't see the audience, you just see him, and he started by saying, now, do we have trumpet players in the room? How many of you have listened to Woody Shaw? And trombone players, how many of you listen to Kay Winding? How many of the alto players have listened to Sonny? So he said, I don't mean heard of him. I mean you actually sat down and listened to him. And his point was that some people, and you tell a great story about this thing, the way to be original is just to close your ears to everything that went before, and then you'll be unique and you'll be yourself. But this is an ongoing problem.
Well, you can suck and be unique. I mean, it's very possible. As a matter of fact, it happens all the time.
The student who told you he didn't listen to Coltrane because he didn't want to sound like him.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And you
know what he said, so what happens if I listen to you and I start learning all this Coltrane, and then I wind up getting criticized because I sound like Coltrane? I said, son, you're never going to have to worry about that. I said, the list is long of musicians on recordings who have tried to sound like him and failed to do so. So I don't really think that should be a primary concern of yours. And the kids in the other class went, ooh, like, I said, no, this is not a reality show. What are you oohing about? This is an honest discussion. I mean, come on, give me a break.
I think I told you there's the historical similar anecdote was Hector Berlioz
Oh, that's
sent
a
his
great
teacher to hear Beethoven's Fifth when it was first played in Paris. And he went to see him the next day, and the guy was
No, you
talking.
got to preface it first. The teacher has always avoided Beethoven.
Yeah, he's always avoiding him, and so he makes him go to hear the Fifth, and he sees his teacher the next day. He said, well, what did you think? He said, I walked out of there. It was unbelievable. I couldn't find my head when I tried to put my hat on. He said, but the more I thought about it, people shouldn't be allowed to write music like that. And Berlioz said, don't worry, it's not likely to happen.
That's right. That's not going to happen for a long time. I mean, yeah.
But I mean,
I just think, for me, I like jazz. I really like it. I like jazz. I didn't like it when I was a kid, so I didn't play it. And then I started playing it, and I fell in love with it. But jazz to me is not a vehicle. It's not a vehicle for me to show off to the world how great I think I am, or how smart I think I am, or how much of a genius I think I am. And that's where a lot of my colleagues and I, that's where we're different. They use the music as a vehicle to talk about their own innovations and their own creativities. And the idea of innovation is kind of jokey anyway. It's like, if you're going to invent a 13th note, okay, that's an innovation. But everything else has pretty much been done. So the question is, are you going to do it well, or are you just going to sound like all of these guys who play at the 55 bar in New York, and the musicians come in and applaud each other and talk about how killing they are, and the regular people have never heard it and never will and don't give a damn. There are your options. And it's really funny. I was listening to this woman named Anj Vanivilms. I kind of bumped into her music, thanks to Spotify, which is something that I first said, Spotify's a drag, but no, Spotify's kind of great. Because I was listening to the Met Opera station, and they had Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau singing Strauss. So then I went to Spotify to find it, but then there was this woman with this big red dress on. I went, well, let me check her out. And I put that on and said, okay, well, sorry, Dietrich. I'll be listening to her from now on. Wow. So I bought the music, and I got exposed to things. It was actually, it was Mahler. It was Mahler, just piano vocal stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I saw this other record she did where she sang Strauss melodies. And Strauss wrote this one piece called Morgan, which he wrote in 1890. And it has sharp 5 chords in it. Now you hear jazz guys talk, they start saying, well, the sharp 5 chord was invented in 1930. I'm like, wrong, 1890. And this is the problem with ignorance, basically. Yeah. With deciding you're going to be the expert in a thing, in a very narrow way. And none of this stuff is new. None of it's new. All right, or I guess the best example I can give you, for those who are not musicians, is Walter Isaacson is the guy who wrote the Steve Jobs book. But this isn't about the Steve Jobs book. Prior to that, he wrote a book on Einstein. And his basic premise of the book was that Einstein did not invent the theory of relativity. All of the information that allowed him to come up with the theory of relativity was already in existence. It's all about the special people who can look at the same data that everyone else is looking at, and they see something in the data that all the other people miss. And that's the same thing in music. You listen to all this music, and there's a bunch of people listening to music, and then there's these couple of people who actually hear information in a way that nobody else hears it. And contrary to popular belief, when that actually happens, the majority of the people hate it and learn to like it. In modern music, they all say, well, I knew as soon as I heard this guy, he was a genius. I said, well, then he ain't a genius, because history says otherwise. If he was really a genius, you'd think it sucks. This guy, Nicholas Slanimsky, wrote this book, The Thesaurus of Scales, that all the jazz musicians play from, tragically. And, but he also wrote a cool book called The History, I think it's The History of Musical Invective. And it's all these great criticisms, One of the great things about premieres is you only have to hear them once. So Mahler's Fifth will never be heard again. It's a piece of garbage. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that the critics were writing at the time. And he found example after example of, Offenbach is the real genius. This guy sucks. And then 100 years later, we're like, okay, well, Offenbach was cute, but this guy's great. And that's kind of how it goes. If it's really as good as people say it is, their first inclination is to not like it because it is so different than everything else you hear. And we crave, as human beings, we crave, most of us, the majority of us, crave consensus, and we crave normality, which is what makes something like American Idol so successful, you know, is that
Or
it
formerly so successful.
well, yeah, well, when Simon left, I mean, you know, the mean guy really played a role in it, but what really made it work was that people will watch it, and the people who were singing, and this is where they were smart, the people that were singing were just a hair better than the people who were watching. Because if a person that's really, really great shows up, imagine if 15-year-old Luciano Pavarotti shows up. All right, you got 9 weeks, and it's over after the first week. So you exclude these people because you can't create suspense if one person is that much better than everyone else. So that person comes in and say, "Oh, you're really good, but you're not what we're looking for." And it's American Idol.
They might have dyed his hair blue and
You know,
let
no,
be
it wouldn't have
weird
worked.
for a month, you know.
As soon as he opened his mouth, everybody in the audience would say, "Oh, that guy, you know, he thinks he's better than everybody." Huh? Well, he kind of is. That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. So, and it is not American Musician. It's American Idol. It's about how you look. It's about how you present it. It's about this whole thing. But you know, when you have people who are, you know, just mediocre is too strong a word, but just average musicians. That's when a guy who's a judge tells you, "Well, your singing was kind of pitchy," and then you don't say pitchy how, sharp or flat. You just go, "Oh, okay, I'll work on that." But you can't work on it if you can't figure out whether it's sharp or flat. And if you could figure it out, then you wouldn't have been pitchy in the first place. So this is the circle of mediocrity that just goes on, and you watch it, and everybody says, "Boy, this show's incredible." And because I'm older and wiser, I just go, "Yeah, it really is." It's awesome.
Well, I think I have a sense that jazz is taught in that way.
Unfortunately, it
By a
is.
book, and I remember someone telling me about being asked to judge a contest, and they had never done it before, a prominent musician, and someone turned to him during the solo and said, "Boy, he really played number 86 well." And the guy said, what's number 8? "Oh, you know, in the book of phrases he played, he interpolated number 86 in an interesting part of the chorus."
And that's what they sound like.
Yeah.
And there's a quorum around that, because I mean that's how you can grade it, that's how you can judge it. So improvisation becomes prepared speeches, which when I was on debate team, I love those guys because they were going to lose. You know, they memorized about 10 things, and they didn't read a lot. So all you had to do was say, you know, Socrates, and they'd be done. Because they would just have these things that they memorized and they would repeat them.
Yeah.
So the people who read the least were, I mean, we loved them. The least, I'm sorry. The people who read the least, we loved them because they couldn't win. Because there's nothing magical about debate. The questions are all the same questions. There are no new questions. Just like when you listen to music, when you read plays are about love, they're about death, they're about betrayal, they're about, you know, honor, they're about, this is like the same thing since the days of Shakespeare and before him. There are comedies, and the comedies are always like love lost, love gained, ha ha he he. The themes are exactly the same. It's the delivery that is different. And if you don't study in a broad way, then you can't deliver differently. You just wind up delivering just like everybody else delivers.
So personally, how do you keep yourself on that edge that you're not falling into the repetitive gulf?
I'm listening for repetition. And I'm also constantly studying music that is outside the sphere of what I do, which allows me to approach what I do from a different way. So when we play certain songs, like Joey wrote this beautiful song called As Summer into Autumn Slips, and it's the most difficult song to play because it's an ostinato bass line. And if you listen to classical music and you understand structure, what makes the song work is the ostinato bass line. So when we hire a bassist, when Eric can't make a gig, the first thing they start doing is adding more notes to the ostinato bass line, thus killing the song. So then you say, please, are there any kids in here? I know one left. No, you're not a kid. How old are you? 18. Oh, kid. He's 18. I mean like baby kids. 5, 4, anywhere?
He wants license to curse.
I want license to say what I say. I just want to make sure. No kids, right? So then you turn to the bass player and say, will you please play the fucking bass line? And then they get mad. Because they think that this is an opportunity to show how much they know. So then when the gig is over, they say, well, man, you didn't give me a chance to show. I said, all you showed was how stupid you are. Because if you could actually hear, then you would understand that the only thing that makes this song work is the ostinato bass line. And this is this thing. There are musicians who think that all songs are vehicles. Instead of like the thing that Shakespeare said, the play's the thing, the song's the thing. Or as Art Blakey said when he cursed me out when I was reharmonizing the Gershwin song, he said, let me help you understand something. George Gershwin does not need your sorry ass to make him hip. George Gershwin is already hip. He does not need you. The only thing that's clear here is that you can't play the song the way it's written, so you're trying to make it more comfortable for you. But guess what? Play the shit as written, and walks away. And at 21, I thought he was the biggest jerk in the world. And then by the time I was 28, I was like, boy, I'm so glad he said that. Because no one says that anymore. Everybody says, yeah, man, I really love those reharms you did. Songs have a purpose. They have an emotional purpose. They're written for a purpose. So when you listen to a song like Stella by Starlight, which was a love song, and then you hear it played 200 clicks faster than it was written, you can tell that the musicians who are playing it don't really hear the song, but they know the chord structures, and they're going to use the chord structures as a vehicle to show how fast they can play. And that's what I mean when I say that, it's one, and listening to classical music has really made me understand the function of structure. So when I'm playing that song, I play almost nothing for the majority of the song. And what makes the song work, we'll play it tonight since I'm talking about it. It'll be toward the end of the show, you hear it. What makes the song work is volume, not velocity. So the song is really, really soft, and it stays soft, and then at the end it gets louder, and it gets louder, and it gets louder, and that's what makes it effective. That's what I learned from listening to classical music. Jazz music in the 50s, because it was nightclub music, had a flatline quality to it, because people were talking and drinking and smoking, trying to get lucky, trying to close a business deal. So the music had to function the way that, and you guys work in a restaurant, when you work in a restaurant, one of the things that you figure out is that music is very important in the restaurant business because it sets the tone for how loud people can talk. And in the restaurant business and the nightclub business, the louder people talk, the more they drink. So the louder the music is, the louder people will talk and the more they will drink. But if you want to have a fine dining restaurant, you make sure that the volume of the music is always in a place where it sets the tone psychologically for people. So you notice when the music is soft, people never talk loud, almost never. The truly unconscious, yeah, they're gonna do what they do. But people kind of subconsciously adjust to what it is. And the whole idea of jazz was we need people in here drinking and talking, so the music had to be bam the whole time. And then some idiot got the idea of putting a no talking sign on the table. Now once you do that, you have changed the discussion. But the musicians play just as they did 60 years ago. But the people are told basically not to talk. And since they're not talking, they're not drinking. So they're just sitting there trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And the music is just flatline. So when we play certain songs, it's really interesting how regular people have, that song affects them. And I'm not really doing anything like this. I'm not doing any of that. It just gets louder and louder and louder, and it does have an effect on people. And that's one of the advantages of listening to symphonic music, is that the great composers really understood the power of sound and the power of melody. Those are the two things that you come away with. Melody has power, and being able to control sound, not just sound, but being able to control it. And then you listen to jazz bands play, for instance. I just heard a band. It was a sextet, and the trumpet player was playing a solo, and then the other two horn players, there's 3 horn players, it was a 3-piece. The other 2 horn players were playing what we call the shout chorus, where they play background lines, and they were playing them dead in the mic as loud as they could, And I'm just watching it going, it just never occurred to them that the trumpet player is getting drowned out by the stuff they're playing because they are not really there. You know, it's just, and when you watch a lot of bands, it's just like, you know, they're all like the band that's not there because nobody's paying attention. The bass player's over here, the drummer's looking over there, the piano player's looking over here, looking at his watch, he's, you know, getting a drink, and it's just like the whole thing is just like they all start and stop at the same time, but they're not playing together. But if you're not paying attention to that, it seems like, oh man, these guys are incredible. And just watch it and go, this is just like the stupidest, this is just dumb. Like, why would I play background lines that drown out the soloists? In what music would that be acceptable? In an R&B band, that gets you fired.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In an R&B band, in one of the simplest forms of music around, that alone gets you fired. In jazz, nobody seems to even notice. The trumpet player's veins are bursting out, or the saxophone player's trying to get over the sound. So there's just it's almost nonsensical in the way that philosophically the music is played.
Well, I mean, I equated with the need to have everybody have their monitors and everybody, you know, pump it up.
Which I don't use. Because it's, like, I played pop music growing up when I had monitors and all that. I mean, acoustic music doesn't need any of that. Acoustic music doesn't need it. It's just not necessary. It's just a little bitty band. It's 4 people. You can't hear yourself? Then go practice. Go work on your tone. But and what I noticed when I use monitors is that what do you put in the monitor? What do you put in the monitor when you use one? Yourself. It's like the perfect disaster. So the piano player's listening to the piano. The sax player's listening to the sax. So I just one day said, yeah, this is kind of stupid. No monitor. And I'm standing in front of him. I can hear them all. Joey needs a monitor because...
Yes, to hear what Eric's doing.
Yeah, because the drums are kind of going at it.
Yeah.
Eric needs a monitor basically for himself because he doesn't use an amp. So he pulls the strings, which is what we need. Because the bass, to me, the drum set is a melodic percussive instrument, and the bass is a percussive melodic instrument. And when you use an amp, the percussion is gone, which is why the bass sound from the 50s, which is like doom, 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 is gone, and now all you hear is pew, 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 which sounds so bad that the musicians instinctively stop playing songs that swing, and they play ostinatos because it sounds so goofy when you're playing. It's going, pew, 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 pew. So they've made an adjustment. I don't think it's a good adjustment, but it's a logical adjustment.
I'm going to open it up because I'm sure there are questions. I know there was one over here before.
You mentioned something about playing fast, and I had the pleasure of hearing Donald Harrison in Brattleboro, and my son's a Berkeley pianist. And the first thing Donald said to me, and I'm a local, as I told you, did they teach you to play fast? Did they teach you to play fast?
No. Donald likes playing fast.
Yeah.
I never really got excited about playing fast. It's kind of like you can teach a monkey to play fast. It's like that kind of thing. There are things you can do, all right? And I mean, if we had some saxophone players here in time, it's like, okay, play this mouthpiece, size 9 with a 4 reed, play fast. They can't. Okay, now here's a size 5 reed. So the smaller the sound gets, the faster the instrument can go. So at some point, you have to make a decision. Are you going to sacrifice tone for technique or technique for tone? Now, if you continually practice over time, there was a great article in the New York Times 10 years ago, and the article was about where are the great American sopranos in operatic singing. And what they basically concluded was that university programs prefer coloratura sopranos, meaning the singers with the much lighter voices, because then they can learn quicker and the university can take credit for their success. But the singers with the big voices, it takes 10 years to train a big voice. They're not going to be in school for 10 years. So oftentimes, when they leave the school, wherever they're training gets the credit. So they make a business decision. We don't want these big voices here. And so a lot of musicians have done the same thing. They want to get to work at the age of 22, 23, 25. And they don't want to be a work in progress when they're 29 or 30. I felt that was okay. I felt that it was okay for me to be 27, 28 and still learning how to play. So I didn't make those same decisions they made. I like the way that Ben Webster sounded and the way Lester Young, I like that sound. I think it has I know it has an effect on people when they hear it. It has less of an effect on musicians. But I never really felt that it was exciting to play for a bunch of musicians. That's almost like an admission of failure, to play for people, for musicians. I want to play for people. You know, when I was playing with our Blakey, there were people there. And then when those guys started dying off, then the crowd was suddenly just musicians giving standing ovations if you play lick number 86. And no, that's not what I wanted to do for a living. So I took my time. And you can hear all these records of me slopping through stuff in my 20s and slopping through stuff in my 30s. And then I hit 40 and it stopped being sloppy. And I started to get smarter about it. But I'm cool with that. I never fell in love with the idea of velocity for the sake of velocity.
It almost seemed to be a joke.
No, he wasn't joking. He was
He was
serious.
serious.
He was serious. There's a mindset. Like a lot of I don't have a lot of friends who like jazz that aren't musicians, but the ones that do, when you talk about Coltrane, the records they like are John Coltrane with Johnny Hartman, John Coltrane with Duke Ellington. My favorite things. Now the musicians love Giant Steps. Regular people don't give a damn about Giant Steps. They never even heard it. It just goes, and this is where the disconnect is. So the musicians say, let's impress the audience. Let's play Giant Steps. The audience won't be impressed. So then they shake their fists at the audience. And the audience says, these guys are idiots. You know, so they haven't really figured out. Learn Giant Steps. Yes, learn it. It's math. It's math. It's not music.
And there's one other thing I want to add, just with our city that I've observed when I go home. The families are musical dynasties there, and they do for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody plays together and they sit in together. Is it that giving outside of New Orleans?
Outside of New Orleans? No, probably not. Because it's just different. It's just different. New Orleans is one of those places where everybody calls us the first family of jazz. There are at least 10 families in New Orleans where the people my age are fourth generation musicians. We were second. So we don't view it as a whatever they call it.
And it's fabulous.
You know, and this is a great nurturing place because they want you to improve and they'll help you. Sometimes they help you by cursing you out. But the whole idea is to not get you on stage and figure out what you don't know to try to humiliate you to an audience. They don't do that. They do that in New York. They don't do it in New Orleans. Thank you.
Other questions?
So, I'm intrigued by your comment about reharmonizing, rephrasing, and changing tempos, because I thought that was the heart of jazz. So how would you, for example, analyze John Lewis's interpretation of Goldberg variations or Bach's Preludes and Fugues in light of your comments about reharmonization and
I think that it was good, but it is also not memorable. Miles Davis is memorable. Kind of Blue is memorable. There are songs that the Modern Jazz Quartet have recorded that are quite memorable to the ears of people. The Bach Preludes and Fugue are not among them. Now, that doesn't mean that he shouldn't have done it, but the thing that I loved about John Lewis is that John Lewis was a forward thinker, and he used music to make himself better. He wasn't, so some other person said, oh, he's merging jazz and classical. That's not what he was doing. He never really, I mean, if you listen to John Lewis's music, and you think about the fact that John Lewis was given an A&R position to find new talent for Atlantic Records, and the first person he chose was Ornette Coleman. Would you assume, if you've ever heard of Ornette Coleman record, that John Lewis would go there? That's precisely the point. John Lewis never tried to represent a camp at all. Schools make these divisions that don't exist. To him, he played the Bach Preludes and Fugues, and then he did what he did with them to extend his overall musical awareness. He wasn't trying, there was no quote that I've ever seen where John Lewis is saying, I've invented a new art form. I have stretched the limitations and the boundaries of music. There are two interviews I have where they told, where the Charlie Parker interview with Paul Desmond.
Oh, Desmond.
Paul Desmond says, well, you've done something really new here. And Charlie Parker says, no, I really haven't done anything new. And then there's the one with the Swedish interviewer who tells Coltrane, well, you've done something really new here. And Coltrane says, well, no, I haven't really done anything new. I'm just playing, it's a continuum. And then you hear new musicians that you've done something new. Yes, I have. Okay, if that works for you. So yeah, I mean, you know, the whole thing is that, I mean, I think the composer Darius Milhaud, there was a book called, I never remember the name, it was like Meet the Composers. It's not actually the name, it's just something, the composers. And they interviewed him, and in the book he says, the hardest thing that anyone can do in music is write a melody that is so infectious that the everyman wants to put it in his pocket and take it home with him. He says anybody can develop technique. He says it's just not that hard. But if you have all of this technique without the basic elements of music, which is melody, then it's just a dead letter. And he said that in 1947. So the whole idea is that, you know, reharmonizing something for the sake of reharmonizing it. Musicians might be impressed, but I mean, think about some of the great piano players who do that right now. They reharmonize everything, and nobody knows who they are. Because people don't want to hear that kind of crap when they go to, they want to be moved by a performance. They don't want to be over-intellectualized. They don't know anything. People go to a concert to be moved, to enjoy it. I've never met a person who's heard us play come to me with tears in their eyes and say, when you guys did that flat 5 substitution, I was just so... I've never heard it. It has never happened in my entire career, and I suspect it will never happen. But in my late 30s, when I finally figured out what the hell I was doing, I have seen people come up to me and say, that song moved me to tears. We played one of Joey's tunes once, and a woman walked up and basically said to him, she walked up to him personally, and we stopped the concert. And she says, you know, this song reminds me so much of my husband, and he just died 6 months ago, and you've moved me. And we just waited, and the audience starts laughing, and they think it's cute. And I didn't know what it was, but I could tell it was something that I didn't need to diminish, or she was moved by it. She doesn't know anything about music. It's not her job to know anything about music, you know? There's a guy, I use the example, there's a guy named Neil Tyson DeGrasse. Have you ever heard of him? He's an astrophysicist. And he does what all the other astrophysicists cannot do. He takes all of the complexity of astrophysics and he distills it down to a series of pithy narratives that everybody can understand. As a result, he's famous. He goes to colleges. He talks to people. He's on all these talk shows. He's on the Bill Maher show all the time. All of his colleagues are not, because they just talk, you know, pencil-headed science stuff. And regular people don't want to hear this nonsense. And this is the thing that, as a musician, you have to do. There's two worlds. There's the music world where we sit here and we over-intellectualize and we argue. But then at some point when you're on stage, your music has to be about something beyond that. And if it's not, nobody's coming. So when other people heard John Lewis's version of the Bach, you know, variations, I'm pretty sure they weren't going, oh, those are Bach variations. Let's compare them to what Glenn Gould did. Let's go by the scores. This is what we do. It's dealing with our inner nerdy ass nerd. But that's not what people do. People don't do that. So you have to kind of be in two worlds at the same time. And a lot of my colleagues are stuck in the nerd world and can't find a way to make their music be about something other than the mathematical aspects of what it is.
So I have a question. Coming back to obviously your reference to the Isaacson-Einstein connection. So some people just have an innate way of seeing new things in existing data.
No.
But can that be taught?
No. It can kind of be taught. It's like my father had a little take on it. He said, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him thirsty. So the whole idea is that Einstein studied physics. He didn't wake up one day. Well, he did wake up one day and say, this is what it is. But he didn't just go work at a car wash and then wake up one day and say, oh, shit. You know, he did the same work that everybody else did. But there's a point at which, and you can see it in sports, there's a point at which instruction becomes intuition. And those are the ones who we talk about. So it has to jump out of the realm of academia and it has to become intuitive. And that's what happened with Einstein. It became intuitive, and then when it became intuitive, he saw stuff. Everybody else missed it because they were academicians. And it's the same thing in music. It has to become intuitive. So you listen to the same piece 100 times, and then the 100th time you hear it, and you hear it in a way you've never heard it before. We like to mythologize about it and believe that a guy was chewing bubble gum one day, you know, some gal woke up and suddenly was like, no, it's work. I remember the first time I heard Ornette Coleman, this writer, Stanley Crouch, said, listen to this. I thought it was the worst piece of music I'd ever heard in my life. And I said, I'll give it a week. And at the end of the week, I said, I think I need to give it more than a week. And the week became 4 months. And at the end of the 4 months, one day I heard it and said, oh my God, is that what this is? But that was 4 months of listening every day. I mean, I know so many musicians, first of all, they don't want to listen. And if they listen after 2 weeks, they go, oh, I don't know what this is. Because they're trying to find a way to codify it mathematically. And when it can't be codified, then they just kind of move away from it and dismiss it. They're not willing to, you know, like my students, what I told my students, you know, because I tell them to listen to music, and they get frustrated because they can't hear it. So there was somebody who was talking about a 10-year process. Like it took them 10 years of constant work to figure out this thing. And I said, when have you ever spent 10 weeks listening to something without quitting? And then none of them could say it because they spend about 2 weeks. And if it's too hard, they just quit. They go find something that makes them feel good about themselves. And this is the whole idea, is that as musicians, we have to listen some more, listen again, listen some more, listen again, listen again. Instead of expecting this payoff like the pot of gold sitting there, you have to listen without expectation of a payoff. And then just maybe, just possibly, if you do the work, there just might be a payoff. But there is no guarantee. And as Americans, we don't like the sound of that. We hedge our bets all the time. We don't want to just do that kind of work without the guarantee of something. So we change. We just stop doing that, and we go in this other route. It's like one student said to me, you know, when I add a new scale to my repertoire, that is tangible evidence of progress. And I said, yes, it's sad progress, but it is progress. And now 6 years later, he's like, yeah, that never did work. I said, no, it was never going to work. But he was just, at 21, he was determined. It's like, you know, no, man, I'm sick of listening to all this music where I can't hear it after 5 months. I'm done with it. I'm going to start working on my scales. And all of a sudden, my father called me last week and said, man, I was listening, I can't remember his name, because you don't know him, so I don't mind telling you his name. But he said, oh, he sounds really good. I said, yeah, he started listening again. And when you talk to more, there's a very famous musician. Well, no, he's not very famous. He's very famous in the jazz community, which is kind of like being a famous optometrist. You know? He's famous in the jazz community. And we were talking about music after our dual concert, and we were talking about composition. And I said, oh, have you ever heard the music of Sally Beamish? And I said, no. So I said, well, I'm going to send you some Sally Beamish, because she's she's modern. You know, she lives in Scotland. She writes great stuff. She's a traditionalist, she's a neoclassicist, but it's all modern. So I sent him the music, and a couple of days later he says, yeah, thanks for sending me that music. I don't have anything that hip to send you, but here are links to all my records. Who does that shit, man? I mean, who in the middle of a scholarly discussion about music sends links to their own music? I mean, it was just like, wow, I know everything I need to know now. And then because of the program I was using, he never actually downloaded the music I sent him. He probably never even listened to it. And when you hear his music, that makes perfect sense. Yes.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
I had sort of a couple of little questions around a central thing, which is about, like, you know, what is the place of composition as, you know, corollary, you know, to improvisation? You know, in the sense that, like, I mean, because you said jazz is basically improvisation, or that's like the...
No, it's not. That's what it's become.
Okay.
And it's really bad.
Okay.
But it, you know,
So
when
that's-
you listen to Louis Armstrong play, he plays melodically. His improvisations are melodic improvisations. You know, the unintended consequence of Coltrane is like improvisation now is mathematical. And this is why audiences don't like it.
Another thing that was interesting to me is because you mentioned the John, or somebody did about the John Lewis thing with Bob. But, you know, what's interesting to me is, like, in that period, music wasn't written down to the extent that it got to be.
Well, with the modern jazz quartet, it was.
No, I meant like in Bach's time.
Oh yeah, well, you know, that's the old. I mean, I learned that the hard way.
Right, right.
I learned that the hard way.
Like the figured bass stuff and all that. I mean,
It's just one of those. I studied harmony, and get the rules, write like Bach, avoid parallel fifths, avoid parallel octaves. And then you read the two-part inventions, and there are 5 in book 1 where he has parallel fifths and parallel octaves clearly. And my teacher says to me, well, what do you know? Bach broke his own rules. And I was 15. Okay. So if Bach can break them, maybe I can break them. But then one day I was 25 after listening to this music for 10 years, and it struck me. There were no rules when he wrote this music. He was just writing down what he heard. And as soon as it's just like, and that's what I'm talking about, it was like a discovery. You wake up one day and you're like, shit, there were no rules. The rules came after, 100 years after. So what the hell have I been doing listening to these idiots for?
The music is the sound.
The music is about sound. Sound is what moves people.
Some people never learn that.
It's not my problem. I mean, there are musicians who have heard me say this, and they say, well, I don't agree. I say, well, please keep disagreeing. That allows me to work. It's just like, don't listen to me. Keep doing what you're doing. Well, the tradition of opera in New Orleans was that if you were going to be enslaved by the French, not the English. So the slaves had Sundays off, and they were allowed to play the drums and do their traditional things in Congo Square. The British were always seemingly fearful of insurrection, so the drums were banned, congregation was banned, and then there was the French Opera House, and anybody could go to hear the opera, even the slaves. And Jelly Roll Morton actually talks about this in his oral documentary. A lot of it is lies, but this part he was talking about how even after slavery, blacks would routinely go and stand in the back of the room and hear opera, and they were welcome to do so. In English society, are you kidding me? I mean, it didn't even matter what color you were. It's like, you can't come in here. You don't have on shoes. Get out of here. I mean, it was highly about function and format. Victorianism, it's a curse. It's a scourge, Victorianism. So, but yeah, it played a central role in pianistic harmonic development, because this plethora of books that we have now didn't exist then. And a lot of those guys couldn't read music anyway, but they were able to be introduced to sound. So it's almost like they had an unfair advantage, because all these other guys in Tennessee and all these places, they couldn't be exposed to that sound. So a lot of people, I mean, I actually was talking to some guys in England, to a class in England, and in the music, the guy was like, well, this could have happened anywhere. It just happened to happen in New Orleans. I'm like, wrong. It could not have happened anywhere. I said, ironically, I'm in England, but the English saw to it that this would never happen. Although that's not what they were thinking at the time. Let's kill music. That's not what they were thinking. But the fact that the French were, for whatever reason, very inclusive, allowed that to happen. That and the combination, and also the fact that the first port of entry for most of the slavery in America was New Orleans. So you had slaves from Jamaica who had been exposed to sounds there, from Cuba who had been exposed from Haiti. So all these sounds start coming in. So we have traditional New Orleans songs that have mambos, but we don't know anything about Afro-Cuban music. But when we hear the mambo, we know it's a mambo. Like, that's the advantage. I mean, you play a mambo for somebody in Georgia, they're like, what the hell is that nonsense? So that was like the great, New Orleans, it was a focal point of a lot of stuff, and it was more just, fate and happenstance and luck. So yeah, but the opera house played a vital role in the harmonic expansion of jazz and ragtime development.
You mentioned earlier that when you were younger, you didn't play much jazz. You didn't.
No, I played R&B and rock and roll.
Oh, that's what you started playing from a young age?
No, I was playing clarinet in the orchestra, but then I turned 14. Puberty kicked in, and suddenly that wasn't appealing anymore, because there were really, really cute girls hanging out at these dances, and the clarinet wasn't gonna make it. And I started playing with the band when I was 12, but puberty hadn't kicked in yet, so I was just having fun playing playing Fender Rhodes. And then suddenly, by the time I hit 14, I was like, okay, I gotta get off this piano. Because it was just like when I heard the Lester Young thing a million years later. Yeah. Lester Young was interviewed. He used to play drums, and he says, I had to get off the drum set because all the cute ladies were taken by the horn player. So I had to be a horn player. And I laughed. I said, man, I like the way you're thinking, old man, you know? So I said, I got to get off this piano. And I convinced my folks to get me a saxophone. And I said, I got to find a guy dumb enough to do this. And his name was Kermit Campbell. And I talked Kermit into playing piano in the band. And I switched to alto saxophone. So, and then I played keyboards in this rock band called Killer Force and the Crispy Critters. So I learned, I was at the best of both worlds for me. I was just playing tunes. And I developed this relationship and this understanding about people.
Did you find a girl?
Yeah, they didn't like me so much at first. I made up for that later, but yeah, they was just, you know, I was too nerdy.
And too honest, no doubt.
Maybe.
I don't
I
like
was honest, it's true, it was, but that was mostly, I was just too nerdy. I didn't, you know, and then 10 years later, you know, I go back to New Orleans and say, honey, if I'd only known, I'm like, too late, baby.
I just want to see if there's somebody who hasn't asked a question, because we're getting close to the end of that.
Thinking of your time with Sting and wondering about that relationship.
Well, he's a great friend to this day. I was always amazed by his musicianship. But then when I thought about it in hindsight, I mean, that's one of the reasons his songs are so good and so effective is because of his musicianship. He has a natural relationship with music. I guess my favorite Sting anecdote has nothing to do with my time with him. He did this record 10 years ago with a lute player singing the songs of John Dowling, who was a madrigal composer in the 17th century in England. And they have a song called Can You See the Bright Lilies Grow? And there's this one scale that you have to sing. And I heard the record, and he sings it with separation. And I immediately jumped up and I called him. And I said, okay, how long did it take you to learn how to sing that scale? And he goes, I'm fine, thank you, how are you? I said, we'll do that shit later. How long did it take you to learn how to sing that song, that scale on Bright Lilies? And he says, 4 months. Now here's a guy who's rich on top of rich. Got all the money you could want. Yet he took the time to take vocal lessons and spend 4 months learning how to sing a scale with separation in an operatic fashion when he clearly, I mean, all you have to do is listen to how people fawn over, you know, Rod Stewart butchering standards to realize that people didn't care. But he cared enough. And that pretty much sums up what it was like to be around him, was that in hindsight, I realized I was playing with one of the 5 most famous people in the world at that time, in 1985. But when you were in the room with him, you would have never really, there was nothing that would make you think that that's what he was, because he was all about trying to make his music better. And he started taking piano lessons and, you know, reading Mozart cantatas, and he just started doing all of this stuff that you just don't expect from guys who sing and perform pop music. So it was great. I had a good time with him.
Thank you.
We don't hear any of his music lately. Does he have any?
Oh, he makes great music now. It's just he's old and he's not going to be played on the radio anymore. So you have to go and find it. And it's on the internet. You can find it. Go to his website. There's a lot of good stuff on
I'm old and I don't use the internet.
Well, honey, that's a problem. Because record stores are gone, so everything is online now. But for the record, you know, you can find somebody young and use their internet. And then you can go to the Sting website and download a lot of cool music. He's doing really good stuff.
That,
Yes.
we're,
Wait.
okay,
Yeah.
one more.
Really quick thing, you know, that kind of speaks to what I was wondering about. Do you still work with people outside of jazz at all? Or,
Not really.
no?
Mostly, I mean, I don't want to work with the young people because it's different. You know, it's just different. We were talking about, this morning, my engineer and I, we were talking about Ziggy Stardust. And I said, you know, that was a great time in music. And he kind of said, well, why do you think it was different? And I'd already pondered the question just on my own, because I was thinking, what is the difference? And the difference is that when David Bowie and The Who and all these guys started playing music, there was no paradigm for rich and famous. It didn't exist. By the time the Beatles became what they became, these guys were already players. So now you have kids with digital software at home, not listening to any music, thinking they're going to be the next great songwriter. So the raison d'etre for playing is, I'm going to be a rock star. When David Bowie started playing music, there was no such thing as a rock star. It was just guys in bands. So the music has an earnestness that's really hard. It always happens. Like Jeff Buckley is a perfect example. He could have been, if he had lived, it would have been, you know, and there are people out there that are really earnest about it. It's not to be overly dismissive of everyone who plays popular music, but when you read interviews of people who are successful now, that my daughters make me read this stuff, everything is so superficial and it's never really about the music. And that's, you know, it was a different time. So the idea of me being 30 years older than people, they don't want me, first of all. They don't know who I am. And they're the first generation that has grown up with music that did not have horns in it. So they don't even hear that way. They didn't grow up with horn players, you know, so the whole thing is different. I'm not crying. I don't want to do it. I mean, I play a lot of classical stuff now, and I play with my band. And when I'm not doing that, I'm at home practicing and learning music and you know, working on stuff.
Well, I want to thank the grand old man on the tenor
Yes.
sax.
Thank y'all for listening.